The morning they started digging through my grandfather's orchard, I was standing barefoot on my porch holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold, just staring at a yellow excavator tearing roots out of the ground like it was ripping bones from a body. The diesel fumes hit first, then the sound. Metal grinding through wet earth, chains rattling, hydraulic arms screeching in the dark Texas dawn. I remember thinking, real clear too, that some people could destroy 40 years of a man's life before breakfast and still sleep just fine at night. That was the morning the Blackwater Ridge HOA made the biggest mistake of their lives. My name's Wade Mercer. I'm 56 years old, third-generation cattle rancher. And up until that week, I'd spent most of my life believing peace was worth more than pride. Funny how fast that changes when somebody mistakes your kindness for weakness. The foreman climbed down off the excavator, holding a clipboard like it was a badge. Young guy, maybe 30, sunburned neck, chewing cinnamon gum hard enough to crack teeth. He waved a permit at me and said, "County-approved drainage easement, sir. We're authorized to begin immediately." I looked past him toward the machines lined up along my fence row. They'd already flattened 3 pecan trees my grandfather planted the year I was born. Trees older than half the people living in that fancy subdivision uphill from my ranch. Authorized by who? I asked. He pointed toward a white Range Rover parked beside the road. And there she was, Celeste Holloway, president of the Blackwater Ridge HOA, real estate broker, local social queen, the kind of woman who smiles with her mouth but not her eyes. She stepped out wearing white jeans and sunglasses at 6 in the damn morning like she was filming a commercial nobody asked for. "Mr. Mercer," she said, smooth as bourbon over ice, "the county determined your creek is the most efficient outlet for the neighborhood runoff system." I laughed once short and ugly. "So your golf course floods, and suddenly my land's your solution?" "It's only a drainage pipe," she replied. "You're being compensated. $8,000. That was the number on the check folded inside the envelope she handed me. $8,000 for 600 feet of pipeline cutting through my property and dumping storm runoff into the creek where my cattle drank. I looked at the check, then at the machines chewing through dirt my grandfather spent 30 years protecting, and something old inside me shifted. Not anger exactly, colder than that. The kind of calm a man gets right before he stops trying to be reasonable. See, people around Dry Creek County thought they knew me. Quiet rancher, keeps to himself, raises Angus cattle, fixes his own fences, drinks cheap beer on the porch after sundown. And most of that was true. What nobody knew. Not Celeste, not the county, not even half the people who'd shaken my hand at church for 20 years. Was that 15 years earlier, during the worst drought this county had ever seen, I quietly bought a failing regional water utility called Trinity Basin Supply, registered it under a holding company nobody could trace back to me. Hired managers. Stayed invisible. These days, Trinity Basin supplied water to 11 towns and developments across the county, including Blackwater Ridge. But Celeste didn't know that yet. Back then, all she saw was an aging rancher standing in dusty boots beside a collapsing barn she wanted bulldozed so her developers could build phase 2 of their luxury community. She'd been trying to buy my land for 5 years. First came the sweet offers. Then came the pressure. Then came the threats disguised as business advice. "You're sitting on wasted potential out here," she told me once while standing beside my cattle pens like she was afraid the dirt might stain her shoes. "Your grandfather would have wanted you to capitalize on the value." I remember smiling at her real slow. My grandfather survived Korea and buried 2 sons before 50. Trust me, he didn't care much about property values. She didn't like that answer. Celeste liked winning. That's the thing about people who build their whole identity around control. Eventually they stop hearing the word no. A week after the pipeline went live, my cattle stopped drinking from the creek. Not gradually either. 40 head of Angus just standing there at the waterline bawling like something was wrong. Animals know things before humans do. I filled a mason jar with creek water and drove it into town for testing. The tech behind the counter looked uncomfortable the second he saw the results. Diesel traces, fertilizer runoff, concrete residue, chemical imbalance high enough to make livestock sick. I drove straight to the Blackwater Ridge Clubhouse. Marble floors, cold air conditioning, lemon perfume in the lobby thick enough to choke on. Celeste kept me waiting 43 minutes on purpose. When her assistant finally led me inside, Celeste didn't even offer me a seat. I handed her the water report. Your runoff contaminated my creek. She barely glanced at the paper. Our engineers certified the system environmentally compliant. My cattle won't drink. Then maybe your cattle are the issue. That smile she gave me after saying it. Lord, some smiles make you feel warm. Hers made me want to check whether my wallet was missing. I leaned forward. Mom, I'm asking you to fix this before it gets worse. She crossed her legs slow, confident, amused. Mr. Mercer, Blackwater Ridge represents over $200 million in development. Your ranch, she shrugged lightly. Well, sentimentality doesn't outweigh progress. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. If you don't like it, sue me. I stood there a second, listening to the fountain outside her office window, water spilling peacefully over stone while my creek turned poisonous downhill. Then I nodded once. Calm, real calm. All right, I told her. We'll do it your way. And for the first time since this whole mess started, I stopped trying to protect the peace. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table with every document related to that pipeline spread out under a yellow overhead light that buzzed like an old fly trap. My wife Nora had gone to bed an hour earlier, but I could still hear the television upstairs, some late-night crime show neither of us was really watching anymore. Funny thing about long marriages, eventually silence becomes its own language. She knew something had shifted in me. Hell, I knew it too. I kept staring at the easement agreement while rain tapped softly against the windows, and that old sentence my grandfather used to say kept rattling around in my head. Pick your battles carefully, Wade, but once you pick one, finish it. So around midnight, I texted Eli Grayson, the operations manager running Trinity Basin Supply for me. Pull Blackwater Ridge's full contract file. Every amendment. Every compliance clause. He replied in under a minute. Trouble? I stared at the screen a second before typing back. Opportunity. The contract landed in my inbox 40 minutes later. 200 pages of utility language most people would rather chew broken glass than read, but buried on page 93 was something beautiful. Environmental contamination upstream of municipal infrastructure constituted material breach of service agreement, allowing Trinity Basin to impose penalties, mandate remediation, or terminate water delivery entirely. I leaned back in my chair and laughed softly to myself. Not loud, not evil, just the kind of laugh a man lets out when he realizes the people trying to bury him accidentally handed him the shovel first. See, folks sign contracts the same way they click online terms and conditions blind. They assume nobody ever reads the boring parts. Problem is, the boring parts are where power hides. Next morning, I drove out along the new pipeline route before sunrise carrying 4 trail cameras and enough coffee to kill a horse. The pipeline cut through my pasture like a fresh scar. Mud still soft. Heavy equipment tracks everywhere. I mounted cameras inside mesquite brush overlooking the maintenance hatches and waited. 3 days passed. Nothing but landscapers and maintenance carts. Then on the 4th afternoon, jackpot. HOA workers rolled up in a utility truck with the Blackwater Ridge logo slapped right on the side. One guy popped open the hatch while another dumped grass clippings, pool filter sludge, and fertilizer bags directly into the runoff system. One of them laughed and said, "Nobody checks where this crap goes anyway." I replayed that footage 6 times that night. Faces clear. License plates visible. Audio perfect. Federal environmental violations gift-wrapped with a bow on top. I copied the footage onto 3 separate hard drives because my grandfather also taught me another valuable lesson. If evidence exists, make backups. By the end of that week, things got uglier. Blackwater Ridge mailed out a glossy neighborhood newsletter attacking me personally. Full color print job. Expensive paper stock. The front page headline read, "Rural neglect threatens community water safety." There was a picture of my barn taken from the road at the worst possible angle, paint peeling, roof crooked from storm damage 3 years earlier. They called my ranch an environmental concern, claimed my cattle operation was contaminating local water sources, suggested nearby families were at risk. I remember holding that paper in my hands, so tight my knuckles turned white. Not because I was hurt, because I realized Celeste wasn't trying to win anymore. She was trying to destroy me publicly. My daughter Savannah called crying that same evening. Somebody had taped one of the newsletters to her apartment door in Fort Worth with the words "Your daddy's poisoning people" written across it in red marker. Savannah's 27 years old, veterinary school graduate, smart as hell, tough too. But hearing her cry cracked something open inside me I'd spent years keeping buried. Then Nora came home from school pale as chalk. She taught 3rd grade over in Millfield Elementary, and apparently somebody emailed the school board questioning whether the wife of an environmental violator should be teaching children. Nora dropped her purse on the counter and just stood there exhausted. "They're trying to scare us," she whispered. I walked outside before answering because I could feel anger climbing up my spine, hot and dangerous. Out by the barn, I stood in the dark listening to crickets and distant thunder rolling across the hills. That's when I stopped thinking about settlement altogether. You want to know the truth? There's a line people cross where forgiveness stops being noble and starts being permission. Celeste crossed it. Next morning, I hired an independent hydrologist named Martin Vale. Guy looked like a geography professor who accidentally wandered onto a cattle ranch. Wire glasses, hiking sandals, silver ponytail halfway down his back. But Martin knew water systems better than anybody in 3 counties. He spent 2 days sampling runoff, creek sediment, groundwater, everything. 10 days later, his report came back 41 pages long and devastating. Chemical contamination traced directly to Blackwater Ridge runoff infrastructure. Illegal discharge levels, soil impact, livestock risk, potential EPA exposure. I mailed copies everywhere. County offices, environmental regulators, HOA board members, and attached right on top was an invoice demanding reimbursement for damages and testing costs. Total load, $14,612. Celeste never responded directly. Instead, county inspectors suddenly started appearing at my ranch every other day. Livestock audits, fence inspections, noise complaints. One kid, barely old enough to shave, apologized halfway through examining my permits. "Honestly, Mr. Mercer, this feels political." "That's because it is," I told him. Then Eli called me one evening, sounding nervous. "Boss, there's something else." Turns out Blackwater Ridge had been exceeding their contracted water usage for almost 2 years. Golf course irrigation, decorative waterfalls, artificial ponds, massive overages nobody had enforced because previous managers kept overlooking it. $42,000 in unpaid excess fees. Then Eli found 17 unauthorized hydrant taps installed during Phase 2 construction. That's not a paperwork issue. That's theft from municipal infrastructure. Fines attached? Another 50 grand. I told Eli to send certified invoices immediately. He hesitated. This'll cause panic. I took a sip of bourbon and stared out across my pasture where lightning bugs drifted over the grass like floating sparks. "Good," I said quietly. "Fear's the only language people like Celeste Holloway understand." 2 nights later, somebody cut my south fence line. 50 yards clean through with bolt cutters. My cattle wandered onto Blackwater Ridge Golf Course around 3 in the morning. By sunrise, there were longhorns standing beside sand traps, chewing expensive landscaping like it was salad. HOA security called the sheriff before they called me. I got fined $500 for loose livestock despite showing deputies the sabotage. One deputy looked embarrassed writing the ticket. "No witnesses," he muttered. "Yeah," I replied. "Funny how that keeps happening." I spent the afternoon repairing fence in 97-degree heat, while sweat soaked through my shirt and horseflies buzzed around my head like tiny chainsaws. Halfway through, Old Man Curtis Bell from the neighboring ranch drove over with a truck full of fence posts and cold beer. Didn't ask questions, just climbed out and started helping. That's ranch country for you. Real neighbors don't hold meetings. They bring wire cutters and work gloves. While we hammered posts into dry earth, Curtis finally glanced over and said, "Heard those HOA people are trying eminent domain now." I stopped swinging the hammer. "What?" "County whispers," he said. "Try to declare your land necessary for flood control expansion." I laughed once, but there wasn't humor in it anymore. Just disbelief. They weren't trying to inconvenience me now. They were trying to erase me completely. That night, I called a lawyer named Naomi Reyes, environmental law specialist out of Austin, sharp enough to cut diamonds. After I explained everything, she stayed silent for a few seconds before saying, "Wade, these people are either unbelievably arrogant or unbelievably stupid. Probably both." She chuckled softly. "Good. Makes my job easier." We talked strategy for almost 2 hours. Lawsuits, injunctions, discovery subpoenas, EPA escalation, contract enforcement. By the end of the call, she finally asked, "How far are you willing to take this?" I looked out my kitchen window toward the dark pasture where my grandfather's orchard used to stand before those machines tore through it. "As far as necessary," I said. "I want them to remember my name long after this is over." Naomi went quiet a second. Then I heard her smile through the phone. "All right then," she said. "Let's ruin them properly." Naomi filed the lawsuit on a Tuesday morning at exactly 8:03 a.m., and by lunchtime the entire county was talking about it like somebody had set fire to the courthouse lawn. Mercer versus Blackwater Ridge HOA. Environmental negligence. Property destruction. Defamation. Intentional harassment. Trespassing. Infrastructure fraud. Reading the filing felt less like paperwork and more like watching somebody lay dynamite beneath a mansion one careful stick at a time. But the Real explosion came 3 days later when the Gazette published Martin Vale's environmental report alongside still images from my trail cameras. There, in full color, were Blackwater Ridge employees dumping chemical waste directly into the drainage system while laughing about it. The county went feral overnight. The HOA Facebook page turned into a digital knife fight. Residents demanded answers. Homeowners started posting photos of brown tap water and flooded yards. Somebody leaked internal HOA spending reports showing Celeste had burned nearly $90,000 on legal consultants while ignoring infrastructure repairs. Even better, one of the board members resigned publicly and called the entire operation a vanity dictatorship with landscaping. That line alone probably shaved 10 grand off every property value in the neighborhood. Celeste finally came to the ranch herself 3 days after the article dropped. I was out near the tractor shed replacing a hydraulic line when her Range Rover rolled up, throwing dust across my pasture. She stepped out wearing sunglasses big enough to hide half her face, carrying an envelope in one manicured hand. "Wade," she said carefully, like she was approaching a wounded animal. "We need to settle this before it gets uglier." I wiped grease off my hand with an old rag and leaned against the tractor tire. "Feels pretty ugly already." She handed me the envelope. Cashier's check, $75,000. In exchange, I dropped the lawsuit, publicly retract my statements, and sign a confidentiality agreement swearing the HOA acted responsibly. I stared at the check a long moment while cicadas screamed from the trees behind us. $75,000. Funny thing is, 5 years earlier I might have taken it. Before Savannah cried on the phone. Before Nora got dragged into their mess. Before they poisoned my creek and tried stealing my land. But some damage changes the math permanently. I handed the envelope back. Get off my ranch, Celeste. Her jaw tightened. You're making a mistake. No, I said softly. You made one when you mistook patience for weakness. She stepped closer then, voice dropping cold and sharp. You really think you can beat people with money like ours? I looked past her toward the hills above Blackwater Ridge, where sprinkler systems sprayed millions of gallons into decorative ponds, while my grandfather's orchard sat uprooted and dead downhill. Then I smiled, not angry anymore, just certain. You still don't understand who you're talking to. 2 weeks later the storm hit. 9 inches of rain in under 20 hours. The kind of Texas storm that rattles windows and turns dry creek beds into rivers overnight. Around 2 in the morning, I woke to a sound like distant thunder that wouldn't stop. I grabbed a flashlight and drove down toward the lower pasture through sheets of rain so thick I could barely see the fence posts. And there it was. The pipeline had burst wide open exactly where Martin predicted it would. Massive sections of corrugated pipes split apart under pressure, blasting runoff water across my fields like a fire hose from hell. Gray sludge flooded 12 acres of pasture, carrying fertilizer foam, chemical stink, and enough contamination to make your eyes water, standing 20 feet away. I just stood there in the rain watching it happen, and God help me, part of me felt relieved, because finally, the truth wasn't hidden inside reports or contracts anymore. It was visible, catastrophic, undeniable. Martin arrived at sunrise with drones and testing equipment, while county crews scrambled uphill trying to restore water pressure to Blackwater Ridge. Turns out the burst pipeline contaminated portions of their own municipal feed system too. Residents lost drinking water for nearly 2 days. Imagine paying $2 million for a luxury home only to brush your teeth with bottled water while sewage runoff floods your golf course. Folks got angry fast. By evening, homeowners were screaming at emergency HOA meetings while local news vans lined the streets outside the subdivision entrance. And right in the middle of that chaos, Naomi made her move. She scheduled a public town hall at the county courthouse and invited everybody. Residents, reporters, EPA officials, commissioners, HOA board members, standing room only. I sat quietly in the back row wearing jeans and a faded denim jacket, while Naomi laid out every piece of evidence one after another like cards in a rigged poker game. The contamination reports, the sabotage, the harassment campaign, the illegal hydrants, the unpaid utility overages, the failed engineering assessments. By the time she finished, half the room looked physically sick. Then Celeste stood up and made the biggest mistake of her entire life. She pointed at me in front of 200 people and shouted, "This bitter old rancher has been sabotaging Blackwater Ridge from the beginning because he hates progress." The room erupted. People yelling. Reporters scribbling notes. One homeowner screamed, "Our kids lost water because of you." Celeste kept talking anyway. Desperate people always do. That's when I stood up. Slow. Calm. The room quieted almost instantly. "You're right about one thing," I said. This ended up being about progress. Then I pulled a folder from inside my jacket and handed copies to the county commissioners. What most of you don't know, I paused long enough to hear the air conditioning humming overhead, is that I own Trinity Basin Supply. Silence. Absolute silence. Even Celeste stopped breathing for a second. Been the owner 15 years now, I continued. And according to the contracts your HOA violated repeatedly, Blackwater Ridge is currently eligible for complete water service termination. Somebody in the crowd whispered, "Holy hell." I looked directly at Celeste while her face drained white right there in front of everybody. "You spent years trying to control this county through land deals and development contracts," I told her quietly. Meanwhile, the whole time, I controlled the one thing your neighborhood couldn't survive without. You could actually feel the panic moving through the room after that. People pulling out phones, whispering, HOA board members arguing with each other in real time. Naomi stepped beside me and calmly presented settlement terms. Full removal of the pipeline. Environmental restoration of my land. $120,000 in damages. Permanent conservation protections preventing future development around my ranch. Immediate resignation of Celeste Holloway. And if they refused, Trinity Basin would terminate water delivery within 72 hours pending environmental review. By the next morning, Celeste resigned. 48 hours later, the HOA accepted every condition. Funny enough, she never even showed up for the final signing. Rumor says the state licensing board opened investigations into her real estate dealings after reporters started digging deeper. Last I heard, she moved somewhere outside Phoenix, trying to start over. Sometimes karma doesn't arrive like lightning. Sometimes it arrives slow, patient, wearing work boots. 3 months later, we held a barbecue beside the restored creek after the pipeline got removed. Neighbors came from all over the county. Nora baked peach cobbler. Savannah announced she was opening her own veterinary clinic using part of the settlement money. Kids played beside water running clean again for the first time in almost a year. And late that evening, old Curtis Bell handed me a cold beer and said, "You know, folks around here think you're some kind of legend now." I laughed at that. Took a slow sip while the sunset burned orange across the pasture. "Nah," I said. "I'm just a rancher who got tired of being polite. But here's the thing I still think about sometimes. If I hadn't secretly owned that water company, would justice have happened at all? Or would they have buried me the same way powerful people bury folks every day?" That question still bothers me. So now I want to ask you something. If somebody with money, lawyers, and political connections came after your family, your land, your livelihood, would you fight back no matter the cost? Or would you walk away to protect your peace? And be honest, because the older I get, the more I realize peace and surrender can look dangerously similar from a distance. If you've ever dealt with HOA abuse, corrupt local politics, or powerful people trying to bully regular folks, drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want to hear about the neighbor who tried stealing my groundwater rights before accidentally confessing on a recorded phone call, hit subscribe. That one gets even crazier.